Welcome back to the Urbanist's Lens, everyone. I'm Drew, and thrilled as always to be your guide through the fascinating world of urban design.
I'm Andrea, and I'm excited to be here today with you all. Speaking of urban design, I had this little encounter with the city's planning just the other day.
Oh, really? What kind of encounter?
Well, picture this. I'm in Madison Square Park trying to enjoy this beautiful afternoon, and I'm just looking for a place to sit and enjoy my bagel.
Mm-hmm.
But every bench I come across has those armrests right in the middle.
Oh, yeah.
Like they're designed to, discourage anyone from actually getting comfortable.
I know exactly what you mean.
Uh,
I always feel like I'm going through some kind of obstacle course just to, sit down. It's funny, though, how these little design choices can really change the way we experience a place.
Absolutely. And that actually brings us to what we're going to be talking about today.
Okay.
Defensive architecture, or as some people call it, hostile architecture. We're going to be exploring its origins, its intended purpose, and the growing debate that surrounds it.
Yeah, it's something that I think we encounter all the time living in New York, but we probably don't even realize it.
Right.
I was walking through Times Square the other day and dodging tourists as usual.
Of course.
And I noticed all those curved benches everywhere that seem to be, discouraging people from hanging out too long.
Yeah.
That's defensive architecture in action.
Exactly. It's fascinating how something as simple as a bench can spark, this whole conversation about urban design and how people interact in the city.
Definitely.
Yeah.
But let's start with the basics. What is defensive architecture and where did this concept come from?
Yeah, good point. Let's
Yeah.
break it down.
Yeah.
Well, the term itself is fairly recent, but the concept goes back to the 1970s with architect Oscar Newman and his idea of defensible space. What's interesting is that his intentions were quite different from how we see this concept applied today.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Tell me more about Newman's original vision.
Well, he believed that how you design a space could directly impact crime rates and social behavior. His theory was that if you create spaces that give residents a sense of ownership, they'll be more inclined to protect those spaces.
Makes sense.
And that naturally leads to less crime. It was all about giving communities the power to shape their environment.
So how did we go from this community-focused approach to what we see today, where it seems like these designs target specific groups of people, especially people experiencing homelessness?
It's a complex shift.
Yeah.
While Newman focused on fostering community and shared responsibility,
Right.
today a lot of defensive architecture is implemented in a very top-down kind of way.
Yeah.
The focus has shifted from empowering communities to controlling or even excluding certain groups of people, and that's really where the term hostile architecture comes into play.
So it's not just about preventing crime in general, but it's about preventing specific types of people from using public spaces.
Yeah, that's right. And while the goal might be to, maintain order or prevent undesirable activities,
Right.
these designs often end up creating an environment that feels hostile and unwelcoming to certain populations.
I think most people have probably seen these types of designs in their cities without even really realizing it.
Yeah,
Can you give us some concrete examples of what defensive architecture looks like in practice?
absolutely. So think about those benches we talked about earlier with the armrests right in the middle.
Yeah.
Those are designed to specifically stop people from lying down.
Okay. What about those metal spikes that you see on ledges or windowsills? I always just assumed those were to keep birds away.
Actually, those are another example of defensive architecture.
Really?
They're meant to prevent people from sitting or sleeping in those areas.
Yeah.
You'll also see strategically placed boulders or planters in public spaces. Again, it's to stop people from gathering or using the space in ways that are considered undesirable.
It's amazing how such small design choices can have a really big impact on how people use and experience public spaces.
Right.
But there's also a lot of criticism surrounding this approach. What are some of the main concerns people have?
One of the biggest criticisms is that defensive architecture disproportionately affects and marginalizes vulnerable populations, particularly people experiencing homelessness,
Right.
by making it impossible to sleep or rest comfortably in public spaces.
Yeah.
It basically criminalizes being homeless and pushes these individuals further to the margins of society.
And it's not just about physical discomfort,
Yeah.
right? There's also a psychological impact as well. I mean, imagine constantly running into these hostile designs.
Exactly. It's got to take a toll.
Research by Chadalavada and Sripadma in 2020
Okay.
showed that these encounters can really have a devastating psychological effect on homeless individuals.
Wow.
It just reinforces these feelings of alienation,
Right.
and it sends a very clear message. You are not welcome. You're not valued in these spaces.
It seems like instead of addressing the root causes of homelessness, like lack of affordable housing or access to mental health services, defensive architecture just tries to sweep the problem under the rug, make it invisible. Yeah, it's a superficial solution. It doesn't actually help anyone in need. It just displaces them, moves them from one uncomfortable spot to another without offering any real support. And it's not just about people experiencing homelessness, you know?
Right.
These designs can impact a lot more people than they're intended to.
Yeah, we were talking about those armrests on the benches earlier.
Right.
They might stop someone from sleeping there, but they also make it difficult for elderly people to sit down, or pregnant women, or anyone with disabilities who might need a little extra support.
Absolutely. And, you know, that brings us to the larger issue of how accessible our public spaces are.
Right.
When we design our cities to accommodate only certain behaviors and preferences, we inevitably end up creating environments that are less welcoming and inclusive to, you know, a wider range of people.
It reminds me of something that the Neighborhood Design Center said in their 2021 report.
Yeah.
They argued that this type of architecture really privileges one type of user over another.
Right.
And it compromises the equitable use of public spaces.
That's a really important point. Public spaces should be designed for everyone, not just a select few.
Absolutely.
When we prioritize exclusion over inclusivity, we all lose out on the benefits of having these vibrant and welcoming public spaces.
So we've talked about some of the practical implications, but what about the ethical concerns surrounding defensive architecture?
Yeah.
There seems to be a lot to unpack there.
Definitely. One of the major ethical concerns is that it kind of reflects this tendency to want to hide social problems instead of addressing them directly. Instead of investing in things like affordable housing or mental health services, we're basically trying to make these issues less visible in our public spaces.
It's almost like saying if we can't see it, then it doesn't exist.
Exactly. And that kind of thinking is not only ineffective, but it's also deeply dehumanizing.
Right.
It sends this message that certain people and their struggles aren't worthy of our attention or compassion.
Yeah.
And that can lead to further stigmatization and marginalization.
Christian Define-Licht, in his 2017 analysis, made a really interesting observation about these designs. He said that they do not and cannot distinguish the vagrant posterior from others considered more deserving.
That's such a key point.
Yeah.
These designs can't differentiate between their intended targets and others who might just need to use the space differently.
Yeah.
And that really underscores the need for a more nuanced and compassionate approach to how we design our cities.
So it's not just about aesthetics. It's about how these design choices reflect our attitudes and priorities as a society.
Exactly. And that leads us to an important question. What are the alternatives?
Yeah.
How can we create public spaces that are both safe and inclusive?
I'm glad you brought that up because I think it's easy to get caught up in the criticisms without offering any solutions.
Right.
So let's talk about those alternatives. What can cities do differently?
Well, one key concept is inclusive design.
Okay.
It's about designing spaces that are accessible and welcoming to people of all ages, abilities, and backgrounds. Instead of focusing on who we want to keep out, we should be thinking about how to make spaces work for everyone.
That makes a lot of sense. So it's about understanding the needs of our communities and then creating spaces that can meet those needs.
Exactly. For example, instead of those benches with armrests in the middle, we could just provide more benches with backrests and armrests on the sides.
Okay.
People can still sit comfortably and feel supported.
Yeah.
But it doesn't prevent someone from lying down if they need to.
That's a great example. It's about finding solutions that work for everyone, not just a select few. It sounds like a real shift in perspective.
It is. Another aspect of inclusive design is considering the sensory experience of a space. Using a variety of textures and materials can make a space more stimulating and engaging for people with different sensory sensitivities.
And that can make the space more interesting and enjoyable for everyone, right? It's not just about accessibility. It's about creating a more welcoming and vibrant environment.
Exactly. And when we create spaces that are genuinely welcoming and inclusive, it fosters a sense of community and can actually help reduce crime naturally.
So it's about addressing the root causes of crime and social disorder rather than just trying to design them away.
Right.
It's about understanding that design alone can't solve complex social problems.
We need to invest in things like affordable housing, mental health services, job training programs, and other resources that can help people get back on their feet.
And those investments can have a ripple effect throughout the whole community, right?
Yeah.
When people have stable housing and access to support, They're less likely to end up on the streets or engage in activities that might be perceived as undesirable.
Exactly. It's about creating a more supportive and compassionate society where everyone has the opportunity to thrive.
Right.
That's a much more effective and ethical approach than just trying to push people who are struggling out of sight.
It seems like it requires a real change in how we think about things.
Mm-hmm.
From seeing certain groups as problems to be solved, to recognizing them as valuable members of our community who deserve our support.
Absolutely. And that shift in perspective should be reflected in how we design our public spaces.
Yeah.
Instead of seeing homeless individuals as a nuisance to be deterred, we can think about how to create spaces that offer them a sense of dignity and belonging.
I've seen some cities experimenting with things like public restrooms and showers for people experiencing homelessness.
Right.
Simple but impactful solutions that can make a big difference.
Those are great examples of how design can be used to actually provide essential services and support rather than just excluding people.
Right.
These types of solutions are not only more humane, but they're also more effective in the long run.
Because when people feel valued and supported, they're more likely to take care of themselves and their surroundings.
Exactly. It's a win-win. And it all comes back to that idea of creating cities that are truly inclusive and equitable for everyone.
So it sounds like creating safer and more inclusive cities is about a lot more than just the physical design of our spaces.
It's about changing how we think about social issues,
Right.
and realizing that, we're all in this together. Investing in the well-being of everyone in our community benefits everyone in the end.
Yeah.
It's about creating a city that's not just functional, but also compassionate and just.
I like that.
Yeah.
If we had to sum up this whole conversation, what would be the one thing you want our listeners to take away from this?
I think the key takeaway is this. Designing cities for people means taking a holistic approach. It's not just about how things look or efficiency. It's about understanding the diverse needs of our communities and creating spaces that are safe, accessible, and welcoming to everyone.
And it's about moving away from that idea of defensive architecture, which often tries to control and exclude people,
Right.
and embracing a more inclusive design approach that really prioritizes equity and compassion.
Absolutely. And it's not just the responsibility of urban planners and designers to make this happen. It's up to all of us as citizens to advocate for more inclusive and equitable cities.
So what can our listeners do to get involved in this conversation and make a difference in their own communities?
I think the first step is just being more aware of the design of your own city.
Okay.
Notice the choices that has been made and how they affect different groups of people. Ask yourself, who are these spaces designed for? Who's being excluded, and how could things be done differently?
Right. Once you start noticing these things, don't be afraid to speak up.
Exactly.
Attend city council meetings, write to your elected officials, advocate for design solutions that are inclusive and equitable.
That's right. We all have a role to play in shaping the future of our cities.
Yeah.
By working together, we can create urban environments that are not only functional, but also beautiful, vibrant, and welcoming to everyone.
Well said.
Here.
Before we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought to consider.
Okay.
As we navigate this complex world of urban design and social dynamics,
Right.
let's remember that what really makes a city successful isn't just its physical infrastructure, but the well-being and happiness of its people.
That's a great point. It's a reminder that creating a truly great city requires not only technical expertise, but also empathy and compassion.
Well said. We'll be back soon with more discourses on the urbanist's lens. Until then, stay curious and keep exploring the fascinating world around you.
See you next time.